Hi, this is Mike Peterson from Challenge Island, Oakland County East, back with our Steamtastic Friday. We're in the middle of our cooking series at Challenge Island, and so over the last couple of weeks we've talked a little bit about the science of cooking, talked about the technology of cooking with a little help from our microwave last week, so if you're interested in that, please check that one out. Today we're going to talk about the engineering of cooking. In particular, we're going to talk about a field of engineering called food engineering. So that's not one of the most popular fields of engineering, but it is extremely important and very necessary. So let me show you a couple of fun facts first about food engineering, then we'll talk about what it is exactly. So if you look across just the United States, if you count them all up, at least as of a couple years ago, there were over 31,000 companies that make food in some form or another. So every one of those companies needs some kind of engineering to go on to figure out how to do that food successfully, and I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. So in terms of people that actually do that food engineering, there's about 13,000 people in the United States that officially call themselves food engineers. And so if you look, that's not quite enough for all the companies out there. So some people go to school to learn food engineering, and some people kind of learn it along the way. So if you're interested in becoming an engineer that works with food, and if you don't have food engineering nearby, you can go into chemical engineering. That's usually the closest field that covers a lot of food stuff. But if you do live in one of these states down here, for example, Iowa State has a program, Michigan State has a program. So there's some universities that actually teach you how to be a food engineer. So that sounds pretty interesting and pretty tasty, but let's talk a little more detail about what a food engineer would be exactly. In fact, I'll quiz you on that as we go here. So first, just to talk a little in general about what an engineer does at a really high level, whether it's phones or cars or satellites, most engineers do all these things or some of these things in some way or another. So in general, what they'll do is they'll round up stuff so that they can build things. Then they'll actually build things, they'll make them. Then once they've made those things, they have to figure out where to put them until they're ready to sell them to somebody. Then they ship them, they get them out to the customers, and then we called it stock here. So they'll put it on a shelf so that people can actually go buy it and then enjoy whatever product that engineer was part of building. So pretty much every kind of engineering does those 5 things. And they also, on top of that, in terms of, and not only do they have to figure all those out, they have to figure out how to do it quickly, cheaply, safely, and with good quality. So a lot of things go into being an engineer, depending on what you're working on. So let's take just a second and think, when it comes to food, how would that be a little different? So food has some of its own things that make it even a little more challenging than some other kinds of engineering. So let me give you a second. If you'd like to pause the video, feel free to do that. But think about food a little bit and think, how would those things be even harder to do if I had to deal with food as opposed to a car or a book or a desk or something like that. All right, so let's take a look at the list of ideas I came up with and we can compare them to what you came up with. So first, couple things we have to worry about is the temperature of the food. So a lot of products, it doesn't really matter if it's 30 degrees out, 70 degrees out, 100 degrees out, it still works. When it comes to food though, it's really important we keep it at the right temperature. So just for example, if I was making ice cream, if I was the ice cream engineer, and if I wasn't very careful to be sure it stays cold all the way from my ice cream factory to the ice cream store, that's not going to be very good ice cream when I'm done. So that's one thing they have to worry about. So they get into refrigeration, into all kinds of cooking technology. How do you make things warm? How do you make them cold? How do you keep them warm? How do you keep them cold? So that's one thing food engineers have to worry about. Another important one is packaging. So food comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes and forms. So just for example, I've got a package of salmon here. So when you think about a salmon in the river, it's kind of wet, it's kind of drippy, starts out kind of messy. So a lot of work goes into cleaning that up and getting it into a package so that you can go to the store and pick that out and not have your hands get all slimy. So packaging is a really big deal too when it comes to food. Also too, cleanliness is super important. So for example, just think of like if you had a bag of flour or a bag of sugar or something like that, and some bugs might get into it. So that would not be a good thing. So it'd be really important when you come up with the packaging for those things, how do you keep it clean so that stuff can't get in and out of it unless you want it to? Those are just a few of the issues. When it comes to the food itself, a few other important things to think about. So when food engineers are working with the people who design the food or who create the recipe for the food, here's some of the things they think about. So nutrition is super important. So think in particular like breakfast cereals. So if you look on the side of that breakfast cereal, there's There's sometimes vitamin A, there's vitamin D, there's iron, there's niacin, all that stuff that's really good for you. Somebody has to figure out how to get all that packaged into the Wheaties flakes or the round Cheerios or whatever they are, so that you can actually eat that and still have it taste okay. So nutrition's important. Freshness is super important. So for example, think about bananas. So when you study a banana goes ripe and goes rotten in only about 4 or 5 days from the time it's picked. So then put on top of that the fact that most bananas come from places like Southeastern Asia or South America. So that's not a lot of time to get that banana all the way into our grocery stores here in the US so that we can eat it and enjoy it before it goes bad. So the engineers have to figure out, how do we move all that food around quick enough so that we can make that happen and that it still tastes good when everybody eats it. Next one is the flavor. Flavor, of course, is super important for food to be any good. So think of like a frozen pizza at the store, or any of those good foods that you eat. If it doesn't taste good, nobody's gonna buy it. And so the food engineer has to be sure it keeps tasting good. Then not only does it need to taste good, but it needs to have what's called consistency. So that's a big word that basically means you want it to taste pretty much the same from time to time. So just for example, think of like a can of Coke or Pepsi or something like that. If the engineer decided one day, is like, oh, I think I'm gonna throw some extra sugar in, I feel like a little extra sweetness today, then whoever gets that Pepsi is gonna drink and think, that's not the Pepsi I'm used to. They may not be so happy about that. So not only do they need to come up with recipes that work really well, taste great, they need to be able to do it over and over again so that we have that good quality and we have that consistency that's so important for engineering. So if you think any of that would be a fun challenge to work on someday, or if you just like food because it tastes great, check out food engineering sometime. That could be a really fun field to have some fun with as you get older and look into engineering someday. With that, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.